The galaxy trembles at the mere mention of the Zorax, a species engineered for war with exoskeletons that can withstand direct energy blasts and reflexes so quick they appear to blur. High Commander Vexnar, his scared face a testament to 3 centuries of conquest, watches from his obsidian throne as the annual submission games conclude. A Centaurian champion, twice the size of an average Zorax, falls to a standard foot soldier. The assembled ambassadors from 50 subjugated worlds maintain carefully neutral expressions. As the arena clears, Vexnar's second-in-command approaches with unusual hesitation. "Speak," Vexnar commands, his voice carrying the metallic rasp of enhanced vocal cords. Commander Krell lowers his gaze, a gesture of deference rarely needed in his distinguished career. "High Commander, the 12th Fleet has reported an anomaly." Vexnar's crest rises slightly, the only indication of his interest. The submission games had grown tedious over the decades, with predictable outcomes and ever-diminishing resistance. An anomaly might provide welcome diversion. "Elaborate," he says, motioning the lesser dignitaries away. This was now a military matter. Scout vessel dominance failed to return from the spiral arm exploration. "We presumed mechanical failure until we received this." Krell activates a holographic display embedded in his forearm guard. The recording crackles with static, showing the vessel's commander, her exoskeletal armor cracked and leaking the distinctive purple fluid of Zorax lifeblood. "Encountered resistance. Primitive planet. Locals call themselves humans. Technology inferior, but tactics unprecedented. Request immediate." The transmission ends with a flash of explosion. The silence that follows feels weightier than usual in the cavernous throne room. Defeat was a concept so foreign to the Zorax that they lacked proper terminology for it in their native language. "A single scout vessel lost is hardly worth my attention," Vexnar finally says, though his secondary heart rate has increased. "Perhaps your warriors have grown complacent during this long peace." Krell's posture stiffens at the implied insult. "With respect, High Commander, dominants carry our latest defensive systems. No primitive species should have capability to breach them. Furthermore, their fighting methods were unsettling." Unsettling. Vexnar repeats the word with genuine curiosity. In 300 years of combat, he had never heard a senior officer use such terminology. The humans fought without proper formation. They sacrificed tactical positions for reasons our analysts cannot determine. Krell hesitates, aware how his next words might sound. They seem to become more effective after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate rational combatants. Vexnar rises from his throne, towering 7 feet tall even among his species. The movement causes ambassadors at the far end of the hall to flinch involuntarily. "Show me the sector coordinates," he demands. The galactic display expands, zooming to a previously unremarkable yellow star with 9 orbiting bodies. The third planet glows blue-green, disappointingly ordinary. "This is the source of your concern. This speck." Vexnar's mandibles click in what passes for amusement among his kind. "I recommend a full battle group, High Commander," Krell says steadily. "Something about these humans. They do not respond as expected." Vexnar studies the planet a moment longer. Perhaps this might prove interesting after all. The Zorax Empire had grown complacent with easy victories. A proper challenge, however minor, might reinvigorate their warrior culture. "Denied," he says finally. "This matter requires closer study. You will take a single warship. Observe these humans, capture specimens if possible, but do not engage in full combat until we understand their anomalous behavior." Krell salutes, fist against chest plate producing the traditional metallic ring of obedience. As his commander departs, Vexnar returns to his private contemplation. For the first time in decades, he feels a sensation he barely recognizes: curiosity. Commander Krell's warship, Inevitable Conquest, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The bridge crew immediately began scanning the primitive defenses of this unremarkable world. Krell stood motionless, studying the tactical displays with his 4 eyes, each capable of independent focus, an evolutionary advantage that made Zorax warriors nearly impossible to flank. Assessment, he demanded of his tactical officer. Puzzling, Commander. Their orbital stations are fragile. Weapons systems rudimentary. Yet, the officer's exoskeletal plates shifted in confusion. Their defense grid demonstrates surprising intricacy. These humans compensate for technological deficiencies with unusual positioning. Krell digested this information. The Zorax had conquered species with far superior technology, yet none had ever destroyed a scout vessel using inferior weapons. Something was missing from their understanding. The outpost on the 4th planet seems lightly defended. The navigation officer reported. Optimal for specimen collection. Set course, Krell ordered. Minimal engagement protocol. I want captives, not casualties. The Mars Colonial Defense Outpost appeared on visual sensors, a collection of domed structures connected by sealed corridors. Unremarkable, except for the 6 defense turrets positioned in a pattern Krell's battle computer labeled inefficient. They sacrifice coverage areas, the weapons officer noted with dismissive clicks of his mandibles. Krell felt unease ripple through his secondary nervous system. Perhaps, or perhaps they know something we don't. The inevitable conquest launched 4 boarding pods toward the outpost's weakest points. Standard procedure called for overwhelming force. The Zorax had always found shock and awe effective against lesser species. The first sign of trouble came when the pods breached the outpost walls. Instead of panicked defenders, the Zorax boarding parties encountered prepared resistance. Humans in sealed armor held defensive positions that maximized their inferior weapons' effectiveness. They knew exactly where we would breach, Krell realized, watching the helmet feeds. But how? More disturbing was the humans' fighting style. Where most species broke formation under pressure, these humans seemed to communicate without speaking, adjusting tactics fluidly. When one defender fell, others immediately compensated without apparent commands. Krell personally led the second wave, curious now. He burst through a sealed door to find a female human commander organizing a fallback position. She moved with unexpected grace for a species lacking exoskeletal enhancement. Their eyes met across the chaotic battlefield. In that moment, Krell experienced something rare in his centuries of combat, recognition of a worthy opponent. The woman smiled, an expression Krell's cultural database labeled as showing teeth, typically a fear response in most species. Yet her biorhythms showed not fear but anticipation. The battle was brutal but brief. Superior Zorax biology eventually overwhelmed the defenders. Krell personally subdued the female commander, impressed when she continued fighting despite injuries that should have incapacitated her. Later, in the ship's containment cells, Krell observed the captured humans. Unlike other species who separated under stress, these prisoners immediately organized themselves, the wounded automatically protected by the stronger. You have a designation, Krell asked the female commander, now separated for interrogation. Major Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Force, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. And you've made a serious miscalculation. Explain, Krell demanded, intrigued by her confidence despite defeat. You think you've seen how humans fight, she said, smiling through bloodied teeth. You haven't even glimpsed what we're capable of when truly threatened. For the first time in his distinguished career, Commander Krell felt something unprecedented. Doubt about the inevitable Zorax victory. Earth's response to the Mars attack came not as panic, but as focused resolve. In the United Earth Defense Headquarters beneath Geneva, Admiral Hassan reviewed the scant footage transmitted before communications went dark. The alien attackers, identified as Zorax from recovered scout vessel data, moved with unnatural speed, their chitinous exoskeletons deflecting standard munitions. Conventional warfare would be catastrophic, General Rivera said, her weathered face grim. Their technological advantage is significant. The room fell silent as the assembled military leaders contemplated humanity's options. Surrender meant subjugation. Full-scale defense meant billions of casualties. Colonel James Reeves, commander of the Special Combat Division, cleared his throat. There's another option. All eyes turned to the colonel. At 53, Reeves bore the scars of decades of combat. A jagged line across his left cheek, an artificial right hand, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had faced death repeatedly and refused its embrace. The Zorax pattern suggests they value combat prowess above all, he continued. They could have obliterated the Mars outpost from orbit. Instead, they sent boarding parties. They wanted to fight face to face. Admiral Hassan leaned forward. Your point, Colonel. We challenged them on their terms, Reeves said simply. A tournament. Their best against ours. The room erupted in overlapping objections. General Rivera cut through the noise. You suggest we gamble humanity's future on glorified hand-to-hand combat. I suggest we play to our strengths, Reeves countered. The Mars defenders lasted 3 times longer than they should have against superior biology. Something about how humans fight confuses the Zorax. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. And what exactly is our advantage in close combat against armored insectoids with superhuman strength? Adaptability, Reeves said without hesitation. Creative thinking, and something they've clearly never encountered, our unique psychology. We've studied the footage frame by frame. The Zorax fight with perfect textbook precision. They lack improvisation. 12 hours later, humanity's unprecedented message streaked toward the inevitable conquest. Instead of pleas for mercy or declarations of war, the aliens received a formal invitation. Commander Krell replayed the transmission for the 3rd time, his confusion evident in the rapid clicking of his secondary mandibles. Since you value combat prowess above all, the human message stated, prove it properly. We propose a tournament, 10 of your champions against 10 of ours. Should you win, Earth will submit without further resistance. Should we prevail, you will depart our system and recognize our sovereignty. It's a trap, his second officer insisted. No species volunteers for direct combat with Zorax. Major Chen, still in captivity, but allowed to observe the proceedings as a diplomatic courtesy, smiled faintly. Or perhaps we're simply offering you what you value most, a chance to prove your superiority. Krell studied the human with growing fascination. Your leaders cannot believe you can defeat us physically. Chen's smile widened. You might be surprised what humans can accomplish when properly motivated. Within the following days, Earth assembled its team while Krell forwarded the challenge to the High Council. Colonel Reeves personally selected each fighter, not merely for strength or skill, but for adaptability and psychological resilience. Lieutenant Maya Wong, whose fighting style incorporated 5 martial arts. Sergeant Dmitry Volkov, who once fought off 6 attackers in complete darkness. Captain Jackson, a marksmanship instructor whose combat innovations had rewritten military doctrine. 5 others, each with their own impossible story of survival against overwhelming odds. Remember, Reeves told his assembled team, they expect us to fight like them. That's exactly why we won't. Major Sarah Chen studied the patterns of her captivity with methodical precision. The Zorax were creatures of absolute routine. Guard rotations occurred precisely every 6 hours, meal deliveries at exact intervals, surveillance suites predictable to the second. Their rigid adherence to procedure revealed a critical weakness. They lacked adaptability. From her transparent cell aboard the inevitable conquest, Chen observed the warrior aliens with the eyes of both soldier and scientist. The Zorax moved with lethal efficiency, their 4-armed frames allowing them to manage multiple weapons simultaneously. Yet their training appeared uniform, lacking the individualized techniques the human fighters developed naturally. You watch us constantly, Commander Krell noted, mandibles clicking as he approached her cell during his daily inspection. What do you hope to learn? Chen met his 4-eyed gaze steadily. The same thing you're trying to learn from us. How to win. Krell tilted his armored head. Victory is inevitable for the Zorax. 300 years of galactic conquest has proven this. 300 years without facing humans, Shen replied simply. The commander studied her with unnerving stillness. What makes your species different? Your bodies are fragile. Your lifespans insignificant. Chen smiled. Perhaps that's precisely our advantage. When you live briefly, you learn quickly. That night, during the artificial darkness cycle, Chen implemented her escape plan. Not through brute force, impossible against Zorak's physiology, but through calculated misdirection. She had noticed the guards never varied their patrol patterns, never considered that a prisoner might deliberately accept injury as tactical advantage. Chen dislocated her own thumb to slit the restraints, timing her movements between surveillance suites. The pain was intense but manageable, something the pain-averse Zoraks could never comprehend. Their species had evolved to avoid injury at all costs, while humans had evolved to function through it when necessary. She reached the ship's data repository unchallenged, downloading combat records and physiological information into a stolen memory crystal. The Zoraks had never considered that their prisoners would prioritize intelligence gathering over escape. It was a blind spot in their strategic thinking. They couldn't conceive of sacrifice as strategy. When the alarm finally sounded, Shen allowed herself to be recaptured, her true mission already accomplished. The crystal had been passed to another prisoner during the brief chaos, who would ensure it reached Earth when prisoner exchanges began before the tournament. Commander Krell personally reviewed the security footage afterward, his confusion evident in his rapid eye movements. "You had access to an escape pod," he said during interrogation, "yet you returned to the detention level. Explain this irrational behavior." Chen shrugged. "Perhaps humans don't think the way you do." Meanwhile, on Earth, Colonel Reeves drove his team beyond conventional limits. The training facility beneath the Rocky Mountains had been modified to simulate Zorak's gravity and atmosphere. Fighters practiced against combat robots programmed with the limited knowledge of Zorak's techniques gathered from Mars survivors. They're stronger, faster, and armored, Reeves told his exhausted team. But they're predictable. They fight by manual, not instinct. Lieutenant Wong wiped blood from her split lip. Their exoskeletons have weak points at the joints. Traditional strikes are useless, but angled attacks might penetrate. Sergeant Volkov demonstrated a modified grappling technique. Their center of gravity is different. We can use that. Captain Jackson had developed specialized fighting sticks that could potentially crack Zorak's chitin. They've never needed to innovate, he explained. We've been innovating our entire history. The team trained 16 hours daily, each member developing unique approaches to the same problem. Unlike the Zorak's champions, who trained in isolation to protect their techniques, the humans shared knowledge freely, their collective intelligence becoming their greatest weapon. The Zoraks have been winning so long they've forgotten how to improve, Reeves told his fighters. We improve with every breath. The neutral space station Convergence gleamed like a diamond against the void, its massive observation dome filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Species from 50 worlds had gathered, officially as witnesses, unofficially as subjugated peoples hoping for the impossible. The human delegation arrived in a modest transport vessel, their simplicity stark against the ornate Zorak's warship that dominated the docking bay. Colonel Reeves led his team through the airlock, each fighter clad in minimal protective gear designed for mobility rather than defense. Commander Krell met them at the diplomatic junction, his ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine. You honor us with your acceptance of combat, he said, the standard Zorak's greeting before ritual warfare. We honor ourselves by defending our freedom, Reeves replied, deviating from the expected response. The subtle breach of protocol sent ripples of whispered commentary through the observing dignitaries. The combat arena occupied the station's central chamber, a circular platform 50 meters across, surrounded by force fields to protect spectators. Ancient laws of intergalactic combat, established long before the Zorak's dominance, would govern the proceedings. High Commander Vexnar himself had arrived to witness what the Zorak's military council considered a formality, Another species humbled. Another world claimed. He observed the humans with clinical detachment, noting their varied physiques and apparent lack of uniform fighting stance. Curious, he commented to his senior advisors. They bring diversity rather than specialization. The first match pitted Lieutenant Wong against Champion Dreskor, a veteran of 70 ritual combats. The Zorax towered over the human woman, his exoskeletal armor gleaming under the arena lights. "You faced the inevitable," Dreskor announced in the ritual pre-combat declaration. Wong simply smiled and settled into a stance no Zorax had ever encountered, a hybrid form she had developed specifically for this confrontation. The combat began explosively. Dreskor charged with typical Zorax efficiency, 4 arms wielding ceremonial blades in precisely choreographed patterns. Wong did not counter as expected. Instead, she moved like water, flowing around strikes rather than opposing them directly. The assembled dignitaries watched in stunned silence as the human lasted not the expected 30 seconds, but 5 minutes, then 10. Though bleeding from several wounds, Wong continued adapting, each Zorax attack pattern recognized and countered with increasing effectiveness. "She's learning during combat," Commander Krell realized with uncomfortable clarity. No species they had encountered possessed this ability to process and adapt so rapidly. When Wong finally fell after 16 minutes of combat, the defeat carried an unsettling quality for the Zorax observers. She had lasted longer than any non-Zorax in recorded history. The second match featured Sergeant Volkov against Champion Kravak. Again, the human fighter demonstrated techniques that evolved during combat itself. Though Volkov too was defeated, he inflicted damage to Kravak's secondary arm joint, a vulnerability the Zorax had believed impossible for opponents to target effectively. By the third match, murmurs rippled through the observation dome. The subjugated species representatives leaned forward with unprecedented interest. The humans were losing as expected, yet something profound was shifting in the atmosphere of inevitability that had surrounded Zorax combat for centuries. The fourth match changed everything. Captain Jackson faced Champion Mortak, undefeated in 3 decades of ritual combat. Rather than engaging directly, Jackson implemented a strategy that appeared chaotic to traditional Zorax combat doctrine, using the environment, creating false openings, and targeting transition points between attack sequences. When Jackson executed a perfectly timed counterstrike that exploited a microscopic delay in Mortak's fighting rhythm, a weakness identified through Major Chen's intelligence, the unthinkable happened. The Zorax champion fell. The silence that followed was absolute. In 3 centuries of dominance, no Zorax had ever been defeated in sanctioned combat by another species. High Commander Vexnar's crest rose in undisguised shock. "Impossible," he whispered. The aftermath of Captain Jackson's victory sent shockwaves through the Zorax delegation. In their 3 centuries of dominance, no contingency plan existed for defeat. High Commander Vexnar immediately called his champions to a private chamber, mandibles clicking in barely contained fury. "Explain this failure," he demanded of the defeated Mortak, who knelt in posture of disgrace. The human fought. Incorrectly, Mortak struggled to articulate. He created patterns, then broke them. Established rhythms, then disrupted them. Vexnar's exoskeleton plates shifted in agitation. Adapt. Analyze their methods and counter them. In the human preparation area, Colonel Reeves gathered his team around Captain Jackson, who, despite his victory, nursed several deep lacerations where Zorax blades had penetrated his defenses. "They'll change tactics now," Reeves warned. "The element of surprise is gone." Major Chen, recently returned in a prisoner exchange negotiated before the tournament, studied footage of the completed matches. "Look here," she highlighted subtle shifts in the Zorax fighting styles. "They're attempting to incorporate counters to our techniques already." "Good," Lieutenant Wong said, surprising the others. "That means they're fighting on our terms now. Adaptation versus adaptation. And that's a battle humans have been winning since we climbed down from the trees." The 5th match proved Wong correct. The Zorax champion entered with modified fighting techniques, clearly designed to counter the human approach from previous matches. The human fighter, Corporal Rodriguez, immediately switched to an entirely different style. What followed was a battle of constant evolution, each fighter adjusting strategy in real time. Rodriguez lost, but not before forcing the Zorax champion to abandon traditional forms entirely. The watching subjugated species representatives whispered among themselves. Never had they seen the mighty Zorax forced to improvise. Commander Krell observed with growing unease. "They're making us fight like them," he murmured to his second. "Chaotic, unpredictable, inferior," his officer insisted, though with less conviction than usual. "Different," Krell corrected, "and we have had 300 years of not needing to face different." The sixth match saw another human victory when Sergeant Volkov employed a strategy incomprehensible to Zorax combat doctrine: deliberate self-injury to create an opening. The concept of sacrificing physical well-being for tactical advantage violated every principle of their evolutionary psychology. As the tournament progressed, the pattern became clear. The Zorax attempted to adapt to human techniques, only for humans to adapt faster. Each match revealed new approaches from both sides, but the learning curve favored the species that had spent their evolutionary history constantly changing. In the observation dome, representatives from subjugated worlds watched with growing hope. A Centaurian diplomat leaned toward a Proximan observer. They adapt like water, taking the shape of whatever challenges them. After 7 matches, the score stood improbably balanced. 4 Zorax victories, 3 human victories. The galaxy held its collective breath. Between matches, a small Zorax child, daughter of a military advisor, approached her guardian with innocent curiosity. "Why do the humans keep getting up?" she asked, mandibles clicking in confusion. The question rippled through the Zorax command structure, eventually reaching High Commander Vexnar himself. The simplicity of the inquiry revealed the philosophical gulf between the species. The Zorax fought to demonstrate superiority. Humans fought because they refused to submit. Vexnar studied the human team preparing for the 8th match. Their bodies were objectively inferior, slower, weaker, unarmored. Yet they possessed something his species had lost through centuries of easy victory: the drive to overcome impossible odds. "Enough observation," Vexnar announced, rising to his full imposing height. "I will end this charade myself." Commander Krell's secondary hearts skipped in alarm. "High Commander, the tournament protocols are ancient and clear," Vexnar interrupted. "A ruling species may substitute its sovereign at any point. I will face their colonel in the final match." The announcement of High Commander Vexnar's personal entry into the tournament sent ripples of tension through the neutral space station. The combat arena was modified with additional reinforcements, not for the safety of combatants, but for spectators. Vexnar's legendary strength had shattered force fields in previous demonstrations. Colonel Reeves received the news with outward calm, though his team noted the tightening around his eyes. At 53, he would face a warrior who had been perfecting combat techniques for 3 centuries. "Their leader is desperate," Major Chen observed during the final strategy session. "He's abandoned protocol to preserve their dominance narrative." "Good," Reeves said simply. "Desperation leads to mistakes." Chen uploaded the final analysis of Vexnar's fighting techniques, gleaned from historical records she had stolen. He favors overwhelming force over subtlety. His exoskeleton is twice as thick as standard Zorax warriors, impervious to conventional strikes. But not to unconventional ones, Reeves noted, studying the anatomical schematics with practiced eyes. Every armor has gaps, or it couldn't move. The final match drew unprecedented attention. Species that had never shown interest in Zorax ritual combat requested observation rights. Something historic was unfolding: the first legitimate challenge to Zorax dominance in living memory. Vexnar entered the arena in full ceremonial battle dress, his exoskeleton bearing markings from 300 years of victories. Each symbol represented a conquered world, a defeated champion, a subjugated species. The message was clear. This human faced not merely a warrior, but the living embodiment of an undefeated empire. Colonel Reeves entered wearing only minimal protection, flexible armor at vital points, leaving joints unencumbered. Where Vexnar appeared imposing, Reeves seemed almost ordinary, except for his eyes, which held the steady gaze of someone intimately familiar with pain and perseverance. "You face the inevitable," Vexnar declared in the ritual opening. Reeves broke protocol again with his response. "I've heard that before." It wasn't true then either. The combat began with explosive intensity. Vexnar attacked with precision, born from centuries of refinement, his 4 arms wielding ceremonial blades in perfect coordination. Reeves avoided direct confrontation, using the arena's limited space to maintain distance, studying patterns in real time. The first connection came 3 minutes in, a Zorax blade slicing across Reeves' shoulder, drawing first blood. Spectators of conquered worlds flinched collectively. But Reeves did not falter. If anything, his movements became more focused, more deliberate. "Why doesn't he fall?" Vexnar demanded after landing what should have been a debilitating strike to Reeves' ribs. "Because humans don't accept inevitable defeat," Reeves answered through gritted teeth, blood seeping through his armor. "We rewrite the rules." What followed was not merely combat, but psychological warfare. Each time Vexnar established dominance, Reeves adjusted strategy completely. The human absorbed punishment that would incapacitate most species, using the Zorax expectation of victory against them. 20 minutes in, far beyond expected duration, Vexnar's attacks grew increasingly desperate. The perfect form deteriorated with frustration. "Why won't you follow the patterns?" he finally shouted after Reeves escaped a supposedly inescapable hold. The human commander, bleeding from multiple wounds but still clear-eyed, saw his opportunity. Vexnar had abandoned discipline for rage, the critical weakness in a species accustomed only to domination. Reeves executed a perfect countermove developed specifically for this moment, using the High Commander's superior weight against him, targeting the microscopic gap where primary and secondary exoskeletal plates joined. The impact produced a sound that silenced the entire observation dome, the crack of unbreakable armor finally breaking. Vexnar fell to one knee, ichor seeping from a previously impossible wound. "Impossible," the High Commander whispered. Reeves stood over his opponent, bloody but unbowed. "Not impossible," he corrected. "Just human." The silence following High Commander Vexnar's defeat lasted precisely 12 seconds. 12 seconds in which 3 centuries of galactic certainty crumbled. Then came the sound no Zorax had ever expected to hear: applause, beginning softly from the Centaurian delegation, spreading until representatives from 50 subjugated worlds stood in unified recognition. Colonel Reeves, still bleeding from multiple wounds, extended his hand to his fallen opponent, a human gesture incomprehensible to Zorax combat tradition. Vexnar stared at the offered hand with all 4 eyes, mandibles clicking in confusion. "This is defeat," Reeves explained quietly, "but not oblivion. Humans understand the difference." After a moment that stretched across historical significance, Vexnar grasped the human's hand and rose unsteadily. "In 300 years," he said, his translator struggling with concepts foreign to Zorax language, "no species has shown us continuation after failure." The tournament's conclusion sent ripples across known space. Within days, systems that had submitted to Zorax authority for generations began requesting diplomatic recognition. Not with violent rebellion that had always failed, but with formal petitions citing the new precedent established through humanity's victory. 2 months later, representatives gathered again, not for combat, but for negotiation. The massive council chamber aboard Earth's diplomatic vessel Unity accommodated delegations from 37 species, including an unprecedented Zorax diplomatic corps. Major Chen, now Admiral Chen following her critical intelligence work, reviewed the proceedings with Colonel Reeves. The Proximan delegation is requesting defense technology, she noted. The Centaurians want educational exchanges. And the Zorax? Reeves asked, his wounds healed but the scars prominent reminders of history's turning point. That's the most surprising development, Chen said, highlighting a communication bearing official Imperial seals. Commander Krell has been appointed Special Envoy to Earth. His faction is gaining influence. Younger Zorax who recognize adaptation as evolutionary necessity. The formal signing ceremony for the Galactic Cooperative Charter drew observers from across known space. The document established principles unprecedented in galactic governance: mutual defense, technological exchange, and sovereignty guarantees for all signatories regardless of military power. Most surprising was High Commander Vexnar's presence, his ceremonial armor modified to conceal the damage from Reeves' decisive blow. His address to the assembly stunned observers accustomed to Zorax's inflexibility. For centuries, we believed strength alone determined the right to lead, he began, mandibles moving in the careful patterns of formal speech. Humans taught us strength takes many forms. Adaptation may be greater than dominance. Connection may be more powerful than conquest. 6 months after the tournament, the first Zorax Human Cultural Exchange Program commenced. Commander Krell observed as young Zorax warriors trained alongside human combat instructors, each learning from the other. A junior Zorax executed a perfect human martial arts move, while human students successfully employed Zorax battle techniques. Will our species ever truly understand each other? Krell asked Admiral Chen as they watched the training. Chen considered the question with appropriate gravity. Understanding isn't required, she answered finally. Respect is enough to begin with. The rest follows naturally. In the station's observation dome, Colonel Reeves stood with High Commander Vexnar, both warriors watching Earth rotate slowly beneath them. Your species fights unlike any we've encountered, Vexnar noted. Not merely to win, but to build something afterward. Reeves nodded. Winning means little without creation following. That's what humans learned through our own bloody history. A lesson worth 300 years of undefeated combat. Vexnar acknowledged, his translator conveying something unprecedented in Zorax communication: humility. Below them, the first joint fleet exercises began. Zorax battlecruisers maneuvering alongside human vessels in cooperative patterns, not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals in a galaxy suddenly full of new possibilities.